Bringing up Baby begins with a man who thinks his life is perfectly organized, and a woman who seems almost designed to destroy that organization one piece at a time. Dr. David Huxley is a paleontologist who believes in order, logic, schedules, and the comforting predictability of museum work. Then Susan Vance crashes into his life like a storm in fancy clothes, and suddenly he is chasing golf balls, losing clothing, hiding from police, hunting for a missing dog, and trying to manage a tame leopard named Baby. It feels like the universe looking at David's careful plans and deciding they are far too neat to survive. The story starts in New York at a museum where David has nearly completed the great project of his professional life. He is assembling the skeleton of a brontosaurus, and only one thing is missing. He needs the final bone to complete it. At the same time, he is trying to secure a huge donation from a wealthy widow named Elizabeth Random. If he can win her support, his museum work will be funded and his future will be secure. David is also about to marry Alice Swallow. Alice is not romantic in any dreamy sense. She is practical, rigid, and almost as committed to structure as David is. Their relationship feels less like passion and more like an agreement between two people who believe distraction is a nuisance. Even the timing of their honeymoon has already been reduced to scheduling problems. Everything in David's life is ordered, reasonable, and dry. Then he goes out to play golf with Mr. Peabody, the lawyer who controls access to the random donation, and everything starts falling apart. On the golf course, David meets Susan Vance, and from the first moment she is a catastrophe. Susan does not follow rules because rules barely seem real to her. She steals David's golf ball without realizing what she is doing, interrupts his attempts to impress Peabody, drives off in his car, and somehow turns a professional meeting into a chain of escalating disasters. David is horrified. Susan is amused. The rhythm between them is established immediately. He tries to restore order. She creates more confusion. He protests. She keeps moving as if life is far too interesting to stop for explanations. David keeps trying to escape her, but Susan has a strange talent for pulling him deeper into her orbit. He follows her to retrieve his car, then gets pulled into dinner, then gets dragged into a nightclub fiasco where his dignity takes another serious blow. By the end of that encounter, Susan has torn the back off his formal clothes, and David has to leave wearing a lady's negligee under borrowed clothing. It is exactly the kind of humiliation his old life would never have allowed. The important thing about these early scenes is that Susan is not malicious. She is impulsive, reckless, and wildly self-confident, but she genuinely likes David almost immediately. She sees something stiff and lonely in him that she wants to shake loose. The trouble is that her way of helping is to unleash pure chaos. The next major turn comes when Susan learns that her aunt is none other than Elizabeth Random, the very woman David is trying to impress for the museum donation. Susan realizes that if she can keep David close, she can also help him secure the money. But because Susan never handles anything in a straightforward way, her attempts to help only make everything messier. She persuades David to come to Connecticut, where her aunt lives, telling him that his presence could be useful. David goes because he cannot afford to lose the donation, and because by this point Susan has wrecked any chance of a quiet return to normal life. He still thinks he can manage things. He still thinks reason will eventually win. Then Baby enters the story. Baby is a tame leopard sent to Susan by her brother from Brazil. The leopard is affectionate, playful, and far too calm about living around humans, which somehow makes the whole situation even more absurd. Susan treats the animal as if keeping a leopard around the house is unusual but manageable. David, naturally, is appalled. The leopard becomes central to everything because Susan needs help getting Baby to Connecticut, and David, against all common sense, gets pulled into the task. Baby also has one odd preference that shapes several scenes. The leopard responds happily to a particular song, and in a movie already built on ridiculous details, that one becomes strangely important. Once they arrive in Connecticut, the plot becomes a blur of escalating confusion involving Baby, Susan's aunt, David's missing dinosaur bone and Susan's little dog George. George looks harmless, but he creates one of David's greatest problems. The final bone David needs for the museum, an intercostal clavicle, has been brought along by accident. George steals it and buries it somewhere outside. David cannot complete his skeleton without it, but now he has to hunt for a missing bone while also trying to manage a leopard and keep Susan's aunt from losing faith in him completely. That treasure hunt becomes one of the most memorable parts of the film. David, Susan, and others end up digging across the countryside, searching for the missing bone while George happily treats the whole thing like a game. For David, it is a nightmare. For Susan, it is simply another exciting detour. He experiences each new disaster as proof his life is collapsing. She experiences each disaster as part of the fun. At the same time, Susan has become completely invested in David, though she does not always express it in a way that helps him. She claims to be protecting him, and in her mind she is. But she also keeps lying, improvising, and trapping him in situations that make him look more suspicious and unstable to everyone around them. The misunderstanding with Aunt Elizabeth grows because Susan keeps inventing stories. She tells her aunt that David is a big game hunter, then later suggests he may be mentally unwell, all because she's trying to explain the increasingly bizarre behavior that her own actions have caused. Elizabeth is bewildered by David, intrigued by him, and not at all sure what to make of the strange man now stumbling around her house. David's relationship with Alice also begins falling apart in the background. The more he gets dragged through Susan's world, the more impossible Alice's world of schedules and control begins to feel. At first, David still clings to the idea of his engagement, but the movie slowly makes it obvious that whatever he thought he wanted before is dissolving under pressure. As if baby were not enough trouble, another leopard enters the story, and this is where the danger becomes real. A wild leopard from a nearby circus escapes and gets mistaken for baby. Unlike Susan's leopard, this one is actually dangerous. But because the humans in the story are already drowning in confusion, it takes far too long for anyone to sort out which leopard is which. This mix-up makes every scene tenser and funnier at the same time. David and Susan think they are managing one ridiculous situation, when in reality they are drifting toward genuine peril. The wild leopard moves through the same spaces as baby, and because the names and assumptions are so scrambled, the characters keep reacting incorrectly. Meanwhile, David grows more and more unrecognizable even to himself. The careful scientist who began the movie worried about grants and dinner schedules is now racing through woods, arguing with strangers, climbing over fences, and delivering frantic explanations no one believes. He never becomes cool or heroic in the usual way. He becomes frazzled, indignant, exhausted, and somehow much more alive. One of the film's great pleasures is watching David finally break under the strain of trying to remain dignified. All the restraint he started with collapses into comic desperation. He stops behaving like the man Alice planned to marry and starts reacting like someone who has been pushed so far beyond ordinary embarrassment that he can no longer pretend control matters. Eventually, the entire mess spills into the local jail. By the time David, Susan, Aunt Elizabeth, Major Horace Applegate, and others end up there, nobody can explain anything clearly anymore. Each person has a different version of events. There are accusations involving stolen cars, missing bones, suspicious behavior, possible insanity, and of course a leopard. The jail sequence is the perfect climax for the film because it traps all the confusion in one place and lets it ricochet between characters who are already operating at full panic. David tries to explain logically what has happened, but logic has become useless. Susan lies to protect him, except her lies make everything worse. Aunt Elizabeth is shocked. Applegate is furious. The authorities think they are dealing with criminals and lunatics. And running beneath all of it is the absurd fact that there really is a leopard involved, which makes the whole story sound even less believable. Then the truth about the two leopards finally bursts into the open. The wild circus leopard is recognized as the real threat, and the humans are forced into quick action. The tame leopard baby and the dangerous escaped leopard are no longer being confused, and the final chase pushes the movie into full screwball chaos. There are attempts to subdue the animal, frantic movement across the grounds, and the sort of climax where everyone is one mistake away from disaster. In the end, the wild leopard is captured, the innocent people are cleared, and the layered misunderstandings finally start untangling. David survives the experience, though not in the form he began. His old orderly life has been smashed apart. And that is exactly what allows the romance to resolve. Once the noise begins to settle, David can no longer pretend he belongs with Alice or with the version of himself she represented. Susan, for all the destruction she has caused, has also revealed something true. Beneath David's stiff habits was a man capable of passion, spontaneity, and love. He did not know that until she tore through his defenses and left nothing tidy standing. Final emotional payoff happens back at the museum. David is trying to return to his skeleton, to work to order, but Susan arrives there too, still full of energy, affection, and trouble. She climbs up toward the Brontosaurus display to speak with him, and in classic fashion the scene cannot remain calm. Through a mixture of clumsiness and fate, the massive skeleton collapses around them. For David at the start of the film, this would have been the ultimate horror. Years of work crashing down in pieces. But now the collapse feels almost symbolic. The old structure had to fall. As the bones come down, Susan confesses what has been true for a while. She loves him. David finally stops fighting what has been obvious to everyone but him. He loves her too. That is what makes Bringing Up Baby more than just a parade of funny accidents. It is a love story built on total disruption. Susan does not gently improve David's life. She wrecks it so completely that he is forced to discover a better version of himself underneath the ruins. David does not tame Susan either. He simply learns that life with her will never be orderly, and by the end he does not want order back if it means losing her. The movie also says something funny and sharp about adulthood. David begins as a man who thinks seriousness equals wisdom. He trusts plans, institutions, and polite behavior. Susan, who seems childish and reckless, turns out to understand something he does not. Life is bigger than systems. Love is irrational. People cannot be organized like museum bones. The more David tries to force his world into neat categories, the more ridiculous he becomes. So Bringing Up Baby ends with a fallen dinosaur, a scientist stripped of his certainty, a woman who never followed any rule at all, and the start of a romance that will probably be gloriously exhausting forever. It is chaos from beginning to end, but that is exactly the point. David Huxley spends the whole movie trying to hold his life together, only to discover that everything worth having arrives when it falls apart.